I'm Dr. John Gartner.
And I'm Dr. Harry Segal.
And welcome to another session of Shrinking Trump.
John and I began this show months ago now in April because we were so concerned about Trump's incipient dementia, also his severe personality disorder, his antisocial personality disorder, in addition, his lying, and his need for absolute loyalty. And we were hoping that Kamala Harris would win the election. In fact, we were convinced that she would. But we've been dealing with the aftermath of this election ever since the election. And with each show, we're stepping back and trying to think about what this means for the country, what this means for citizen democracy, and what it means for us psychologically, you, the viewers, but also for John and me as well. And it's a very difficult time. And to be honest, I'm so glad you're here because we need a community of viewers and listeners to support us as well as our chance to support you. John?
So we're all sort of holding our breath, waiting for the attack to formally begin. And that's what it is. It's going to be an attack on democracy and an attack on anyone who gets in his way. And so the question is, what are we going to do about it? I think about Benjamin Franklin's famous line, we must hang together or we will surely hang separately. Or the other famous line where the person says, then they came for the homosexuals, I said nothing because I wasn't a homosexual. And they came for the communists and said nothing because I wasn't a communist. Or they came for the Jews, I said nothing because I wasn't a Jew. And then when they came for me, there was no one to say anything to defend me.
There's many stories like that, isn't there? And the other thing that Franklin said that's so famous is when a woman asked him, what kind of government do we have? And he said, a republic, if you can keep it. And that phrase is really what is motivating my attention. Can we keep it? And I do believe there are institutions and potential for resistance to what's happening, but I don't know how it's going to turn out. And the stakes could not be higher.
Right. So that's the theme I kind of wanted to focus on today is all of these groups that are under threat. Right. What are we going to do, or are we doing anything to protect them? But I'd like to first hear one of the columnists that you and I really appreciate is Jennifer Rubin. She also has a podcast. She put this very succinctly, and I want to let her speak.
There'll be a lot of people who defend what Trump is doing. Hey, there was those two MSNBC folks, remember, the hosts who went down to Mar-a-Lago and are still complaining that they've been criticized for doing so. Well, there's going to be too much of that. But for everyone else, I think two things are important. First, going forward, people have to defend one another. An attack on one is an attack on all. Whether or not you agree with someone who worked on the January 6th committee or wrote critically or spoke out critically against Trump, as soon as he begins to indict, attack, sue these people, everyone needs to come to their defense.
I'm still furious that Joe and Mika went down to Mar-a-Lago to kiss probably more than the ring. But Jennifer's wonderful, and she's absolutely right and very succinct. It reminds me of what Senator Blumenthal said from Connecticut, I believe, right? Which was, he was asked, should Biden just give blanket pardons to everyone on the January 6th committee and everyone else that Kash Patel has put on his list? And Blumenthal said, no. He said, I am raising money. I'm amassing a war chest to help people defend themselves if that's the case. That Trump's FBI director or his attorney general, these actions should not be legitimized by a pardon.
Yeah. Well, you actually kind of jumped ahead because I was going to talk about the pardons. That's okay. But let's just put a pin on that because I'm going to disagree with you about that. I think he should pardon everybody because the theme that I'm coming through with today is we need to protect everybody. And we need to do whatever we can, use whatever power we have. We're way past the point where we have to worry about how it looks, what precedent it sets, how others might interpret it, how it might be played on Fox. I don't give a fuck. Protect people, protect people, protect people.
So it sounds like you're going to take that pardon.
Oh, actually, I was going to say, as a matter of fact, if Obama and Hillary Clinton are too proud to take theirs, I'll take theirs. Can I have one? Can I have one, please?
Listen, when you get that pardon, I'll be somewhere in the south of France. Mm-hmm. I'll be glad to hear from you. We can do the show from there.
Then we could say pardon. Okay, but before we get to the pardons, I want to talk about the civil service. This is a group of people who are under threat, and they're terrified. I think we've been talking about this on the show, and I said, look, there's 2.8 million people who work for the federal government, and there's 2.8 million conversations going on around the country right now, around the dinner table, with people going, do I need to leave my job? Can I leave my job? Can we afford for me to leave my job? What's going to happen? Is there some way I can hide so they don't fire me? So this is a group of people who are experiencing a direct threat right now. He hasn't taken office yet, but they're experiencing the threat now. Federal employees scramble to insulate themselves from Trump's purge. Career civil servants are scrubbing social media, changing job titles, and looking for private sector work over fear that Trump might fire them. Before Trump takes office, January 20th, career staffers are racing to outmaneuver his plans to gut and radically reshape the nonpartisan bureaucracy of 2.3 million. The president-elect has promised to fire thousands of professionals and replace them with political loyalists, slash trillions of dollars from the federal budget, eliminate departments, and relocate others away from what he derides as the deep state of intransigent bureaucrats in the Capitol. Russ Vought, Trump's pick to run the Office of Management and Budget, told supporters earlier this year that Trump's second term would, quote, put bureaucrats in trauma. His goal is to put bureaucrats in a state of trauma. And I think that's part of what they're experiencing right now. We've talked about trauma on the show. We talked about experiencing trauma ourselves after the debate with Biden, after the election. And you, Harry, you talked about trauma as being sort of, I guess, what our last guest last week called radical impermanence, but trauma being when something that you thought you could count on is suddenly either disappears or becomes destructive. And that sense of reversal, right? And the sense of safety you have in the world, and the sense of the fact that the world works in some kind of moral way is upended.
I think these are important threats and we have to be careful, but I'm also very tuned into the bluster of the Trump people. They, remember Trump never built a wall, but now claims he did. There's a lot of bluster. And I frankly don't think that 2.8 million people's jobs are at risk. I think there are some that are at risk, and it's very dangerous, and we'll see. But there's a lot of bluster happening here, and then they're going to hit the institutions, and we'll see what happens. I'm worried about it, but I don't see the catastrophe yet that you do, but I'm glad you do, because we have to be vigilant.
Well, I think, one of the biggest dangers, it's not just that people are going to be fired. It's that people are they talk about this, don't obey in advance. But people are self-interested, and they should be. I think most of the leaving is going to be voluntary. That people are going to self-select themselves to get the hell out of an environment where their job's either going to be eliminated or degraded, or they'll be in a hostile work environment. But let's read some more of this.
Exactly. Let's look at what the unions are talking about.
Yeah. Well, not much.
It's just concerning. Well, yeah.
No. Federal employees are scrubbing their Facebook and X accounts for any negative posts about Trump. Some, including at least one prominent official who testified in Trump's first impeachment inquiry, are weighing putting in retirement papers, while others maneuver to transfer to seemingly safer agencies. DC recruiting firms are seeing a booming business from those looking for private sector work. Meanwhile, some agencies have moved to reclassify jobs with titles that could clash with Trump's agenda. So that's one thing they're doing, right, to protect people. They're trying to reclassify their jobs, especially those promoting diversity, equity, and inclusion, boosting environmental justice, and fighting the effects of climate change. Yeah, if you have any of those job titles, you want to change your job title. For the first time, some civil servants are taking out liability insurance to cover lawyers if they're demoted or fired. You mentioned a fund for lawyers. And in a rare alliance, outgoing Biden administration appointees are joining forces with labor unions to extend collective bargaining agreements, locking in benefits before the incoming administration can seek to undo them. Days before he resigned as Social Security Commissioner last week, Martin O'Malley, my former governor, his top staff secured a deal with the agency's powerful union to maintain its generous telework policy through October 2029. So cleverly, they're putting the right to telework in the union contract, but the union and management are cooperating to put it in the union benefits. For the first time, making work from home a feature of collective bargaining contract instead of just at management's discretion. So there are efforts there that people are making.
Well, yeah, that's resistance.
Right.
That's what I'm talking about. There's going to be pushback. There's pushback in advance, John, not afterwards. So there is obeying in advance, but there's also pushback in advance.
Mm-hmm. But it really has the quality of like just getting as many people out of Nazi Germany as you can before it's too late, kind of thing.
I don't think that's right. I think we're talking about a government shakeup that could lead to disastrous consequences. And we're seeing a pushback to the shakeup of the government. That's not the same thing as, arresting Jews and putting them in concentration camps. I'm not saying that Trump doesn't want to do that to illegal immigrants. He does. Mm-hmm. But he's also been, keep going.
Well, the first thing Hitler did was purge the bureaucracy. That was his first act. Because the bureaucracy, the deep state, it's not deep in a nefarious way. It's deep in a good way. What they're doing here is actually turning the clock back to the 1870s. Okay, because it was President Ulysses S. Grant, who instituted the Civil Service Reform Act that made the civil service apolitical. Up until then, it'd just been pure patronage jobs, and essentially that's what we're going back to.
To about 20 to 30,000 employees, not the 2.8. Mm-hmm. It's just that's not covered under what he's doing.
No, it's not 2.8 million. He's not going to fire all 2.8 million. The problem is the ones that he wants to fire the most are the people who know the most. So the people who are the most senior, the knowledge workers who work remotely and are therefore going to be most likely to flee when they can't work remotely anymore, just for practical reasons for their lives. But the people they want to get rid of are the experts, the people who have institutional memory, the people who know how things are done and what the proper procedures are, the people who can say no. Those are the people they most want to get rid of. And there's what I'm trying to say is there's a lot of ways to do it. Talking about canceling, we've talked about canceling remote work, and you said they can't do that without an act of Congress. Well, there's a bill before Congress now to remove remote work for all federal workers. So you said, well, the unions are going to scream. I've read about 5 different quotes from different members of different federal unions, and not one of them has said, now maybe this is strategic, but not one of them has said what they're going to do to push back. They're saying it's terrible, our people are scared, we're going to lose lots of jobs. But they're not saying we'll see you in court or this is a violation of the statute, blah, blah, blah.
I know that unions have resources and things that they can do. And I do think it's strategic that they're calling an alarm rather than saying what they're going to do. They don't want to play their hand. But John, it's going to be a battle over that bureaucracy. And he has a lot of power. Yeah. And he's attacking it in all kinds of ways. So we're not in much disagreement. I just think there's going to be some pushback.
No, I think there will be, and they're trying to hide everyone they can. It's sort of like hiding the Jews. Like, shh, any DEI workers
Not
here? Anyone
hiding the
from
Jews,
DEI?
John.
Anyone here? No, but they're saying they're literally changing people's job titles,
I
so you
get
won't
that.
know they're DEI, or
I
you won't
get
know
that.
that they're climate
It's
change.
not hiding the Jews. I'm sorry. If
We're
it
just
gets to
hiding
that point,
we're
believe
hiding
me.
the scientists. We're hiding the scientists. Any scientists here?
Look, they're trying to
Any climate
protect. They're
scientists?
trying to protect bureaucrats who have
Yeah.
progressive titles and doing progressive things, which this new administration doesn't want them to do. I don't think that's so unusual. What's unusual is wanting to take out 20 to 30,000 employees and make them patronage. That's what's horrible. Okay.
Yeah.
But we'll see what they do.
We'll see what they do. So getting back to pardons,
Okay.
I want to quote someone who agrees with me,
Of course.
Naomi Goldberg. Of course, the only people I quote. Here's what she has to say about pardons. Trump's FBI pick has an enemies list. Biden should pardon everyone on it. There are a few good things to be said about Donald Trump's plan to fire the FBI director, Chris Wray, and install in his place Kash Patel, a thuggish lackey who has spent years fantasizing about taking revenge on Trump's enemies. But there is one. Patel has helpfully provided us with a list of people President Biden should pardon before he leaves office. There's no version of a Trump restoration that doesn't result in both human and institutional destruction. Biden still has a duty to save who he can. I'm going to take a really harsh position on this, because if Biden doesn't do this, I'm going to tell him to fuck himself. I'm that angry about it. I'm serious. I believe that Biden is largely responsible for the loss of our democracy because he was weak and he didn't understand the game that he was playing. He didn't understand that this was not the 20th century anymore. You don't become a successful president by reaching across the aisle and just proving to people that you're good by the policies that you pass. This was trench warfare, and he didn't fight. Not the way we needed him to win. And so the thing Democrats it's like we're so dumb. We keep making the same damn mistake over and over again. Oh, we can't use our power to protect ourselves or to protect innocent people because somebody might get mad. Somebody might misinterpret it. Some might say we're setting a bad precedent. They might say bad things about us on Fox.
Listen, I take your point. You're absolutely right about trench warfare. To give the Democrats their due, Kamala did almost everything right. That was a fantastic campaign. Democrats were in lockstep. They were no longer, grousing and being, that stuff that they do. It was too little too late.
That's the point. It was too late. We should have been fighting from day one. I mean,
he never fought. He never fought the whole time.
He never fought the whole time.
No, John, he didn't talk about Trump for 2 years.
Yeah. He didn't talk about the assault on our democracy. Right. And yes, in the 20th century, he would have been right.
Yep.
He would have made a great 20th century president.
And you know when it turned? With Bill Clinton. That's when you began to see the kind of vicious politics that we see now. The trench warfare.
The impeachment
began with him.
Yeah, the impeachment was, Hillary said the impeachment was a vast right-wing conspiracy.
Oh, it was.
Laughed at her, and she was deadly accurate. And if we had listened to her then, we wouldn't be here now.
Yes, and she ran one of the worst campaigns I've ever seen. So she has some culpability too. She let Trump in. In any case, I agree with you, John. You've convinced me.
Oh wow!
Yeah,
that's impressive.
Yeah.
Oh great. So another group we need to protect are the press. Okay, and Jamie Raskin introduced a bill that passed the House to build in extra press protections in anticipation of how the press is going to be attacked by Trump.
House?
Mm-hmm. I believe. I don't know, because it was actually a bipartisan bill. Believe it or not, some people must have
I
crossed
see.
over.
No, it'd have
Yeah.
to be if it
Yeah,
passed.
but let's see what happened in the Senate. Senate GOP blocks bill to protect journalists after Trump opposes it. Well, Harry, this is one that's a little bit close to my heart because we are very, very, very low-level journalists. Okay, and so I guess we didn't get that extra protection that we were hoping for.
I refer to myself as an extremely minor media figure. Extremely minor.
Yeah. Hopefully we're low enough on the food chain they won't get to us, but they might start becoming more efficient. But let's talk about other groups that are also being that we need to protect. I don't have a slide about immigrants, but same question. What are we going to do or not do, right? When they start coming for people that we know, what are we going to do? Or are people going to do anything? I'm not saying I know the answer to this question, but I'm saying this is the question, right? This is what's going to really determine, in large part, whether we just collapse or whether we resist, whether we protect people.
Well, we began the show shrinking Trump because we were two therapists talking about Trump and how crazy he is and disturbed he is. But he's also such an effective manipulator. And, the thing that he never wants to lose is his popularity. And if we have anything, any sliver of hope to hold on to, is that. For example, he's not going to drag us into a war because the working class in this country will spit on him if he drags us to another war. In the case of this, he mentioned in that interview with Kristen Welker, which I forced myself to watch, that he mentioned what Ron Brownstein said. He mentioned, if there's photographs of children being taken away from their mothers, how bad that would look. So he's already thinking about how he can massage his campaign promise to round up millions of people and deport them. And he's starting to adjust it because he needs to keep his base happy, but he also knows it's going to be a disaster. There was one other thing he said like that was remarkable. Like he said, this is in the Time magazine interview, we're going to send all these, we're going to deport them back to their home countries. And then the interviewer said, what if the home countries won't take them back? Venezuela says they won't take them back.
Well, then they go to the concentration camps.
Well, and what Trump said was, we'll just put tariffs on them because, tariff solves everything.
Yeah.
So he's going to have difficulty doing the terrible things he says he wants to do as far as immigration is concerned. And as far as, right? So we'll see. It's again, I'm not trying to be hopeful to our audience. I'm not hopeful, but I want to be as realistic as I can about who this man is. And he does not want bad ratings. He's a narcissistic personality disorder who needs to be adored. And he's setting up a dictatorship in the Putin mobster style of criminals who are running things and lying to the public. But he never wants to lose his ratings. That's the one small thing we can leverage.
You keep making that point, and it's a good point. It's good because Putin doesn't care about his ratings, right?
He doesn't need to.
He doesn't need to.
He took over a very weak fledgling democracy that had no history.
Yeah.
He just killed everybody. It's very different.
And so there's something I want to bring up. I really wasn't sure whether to talk about it on the show, but I guess it's our show, so we can do that. Something has been bothering me for a week. I've really been down about it, which is that the person who was going to be our guest next week, who was extremely enthusiastic about coming on, he's a master therapist of a particular style. I thought he could really offer people comfort and coping strategies. I spoke to him for 45 minutes. I've known him for years and years. We've worked together closely for many years. We spoke for 45 minutes. He was so excited about the show. He asked if he could bring one of our mutual colleagues on. And then 48 hours later, I get a very curt text, I've decided to go in a different direction. This really isn't right for me. I call him back and text him saying, can we just talk about this? And he refuses to even speak about it. He just says, look, this isn't right for me. I don't do podcasts, don't even talk to me. And I was really hurt by this. It's been really making me down all week. I'm not looking for sympathy from the audience, but although I know you're going to give it to me because you guys are so nice. I know I can see, because I know you people don't know this because I never type anything in the live chat, but I actually do watch the show live when we stream it. I look at all of the live comments, so I can just visualize at this point people sending little hearts and going, "Oh, Dr. Gardner, I'm so sorry that happened to you." So just in advance, I can say I appreciate your sympathy, but that's not why I'm telling this story. I'm telling this story because this is what the democracy experts call surrendering in advance.
Right.
In other words, he's not under any threat. His boss didn't tell him not to do it. We didn't ask him to come on the air and say Trump was bad. All he has to do is come on the air and say, I have a form of therapy that can help people who might be upset about the election. And that suddenly made him frightened and made him think, this could hurt me somehow. And this is what, Harry, remember this, you and I are old enough to remember these classic bits. Remember the comedian bit with these movies where they'd be like a comedian? There's always this bit where they're in the army, right? And the sergeant goes, I need a volunteer for a very dangerous mission. Everybody takes a giant step backwards. So the two fools, are just standing there and suddenly it looks like they step forward for the suicide mission, but actually everyone else stepped back.
Probably Wally Cox, something like that.
Right. Exactly. That kind of humor. And it's sort of like, I can just feel people taking a giant step back, right? And so leaving us here exposed, right? Trying to keep a dialogue, trying to keep a conversation going. And he's not even under any threat. But this is the kind of thing that happens. So this would be the opposite of what Jennifer Rubin was talking about, the opposite of our hanging together, right? And supporting each other and going, holding fast to the people who are vulnerable and protecting them rather than running away from them.
There's going to be moments of decision about courage, about where you want to put your resources when you want to oppose things. And that's part of what we want to do on the show, is to keep talking about what we're seeing. We don't want to inundate you guys with tons of news stories. And you'll notice we don't have tape of Trump speaking. I don't want to hear him speak.
No, nobody wants to hear his voice.
Speak. I hate them. But there'll be a time over the next 6 months, and maybe very soon, where we are going to have to think about decision points, about fighting, about resistance. And I just want you all to know we'll be here. We'll be here thinking about it along with you.
Well, Harry, since you mentioned that nobody wants to hear his voice, we get these actually again in the comments, which I read all of them. Even when we play tape of Trump for a good reason, people say, I love your show, but I have to hang up now. I can't listen to his voice anymore. So I thought about the Welker interview. Right? He did this big interview with Kristen Welker and Kristen Welker, and so I thought, well, how are we going to present that without his voice? And I realized, actually, we could get a transcript and do a dramatic reenactment. So it was a long interview. I just picked 3 topics for us to talk about. One is Hegseth's drinking.
Sorry, I can't.
So we're gonna do our rendition of this. Harry is going to be Welker for this set of and then we're going to switch. But he's going to be Welker for a while, and I'm going to be Trump. So
all right,
let's see it on the screen here.
The fact that there are these allegations against him, Hegseth, misconduct, sexual misconduct, heavy drinking, the fact that he said to some senators reportedly he'll stop drinking if he gets this job, does that worry you?
No, I think everybody has something that they can stop. People can stop eating. I'm lucky. I'm not a drinker, but I could stop eating. And we all wanted to stop doing something. And if he said that, I mean, that's a nice thing to say. That's a good thing to say. You know, Harry, as a psychologist, we know that if an alcoholic says to us, they're going to stop drinking, we can take that to the bank.
They're not. If you work with an alcoholic and he or she bargains with you and says, I'm only going to have 4 drinks this week, You say, I'll take the bet. They always come back
Mhm.
having had 8.
Mhm.
It's a very hard thing to stop drinking.
But it's a
Alcoholism.
nice thing to say. It's a nice thing to say, though, isn't it? It's a lovely thing to say.
Trump is feeling very benevolent these days.
Yes.
He's very happy. He's vindicated. He's won. He can do what he wants. He's not angry yet. He hasn't gotten irritable yet.
Because after all, there's never been an alcoholic that had the thought that they'd like to quit drinking who didn't quit drinking. It's a lovely thought.
Let's not forget that Trump's brother died of alcoholism, which is why Trump doesn't drink and never has drank or taken drugs.
He actually has very low tolerance for drinking, actually, in other people as well. So anyway, so that's the first thing. No problem. He's going to stop because he wants to, and he said he would if he got the job. Now let's look at this issue about tariffs. The thing about tariffs, of course, is tariffs really are a tax on the poor. It's actually the opposite of taxing the rich and helping the poor. It's taxing the poor and helping the rich, because the people who pay the tariffs are the customers. And the customers are the middle-class people who go to, to Walmart and buy stuff.
It means the companies importing the goods at a higher rate will pass along the increase to the consumers. That's what it means.
Right. And so that tariff that's going to the government, right, is actually being paid by the consumer. So it's actually a tax on the poor people. But it's like a sales tax, like a national sales tax. But sales taxes are regressive, right? A regressive tax is one that taxes the poor more than the rich. A progressive tax is one that taxes the rich more than the poor. Our income tax is progressive. Sure. But any kind of a sales tax is regressive, because poor people buy more stuff than rich people.
Everyone pays the same tax regardless of their income. That's what it means.
Right. Both things. So let's look at Trump's tap dancing with Kristen Welker about tariffs.
All right, we're going to delve into your cabinet just a little bit later, but I want to delve into one of your signature promises on the campaign trail, which was to end inflation to lower prices. You are now proposing tariffs against the United States' 3 biggest trading partners. Economists of all stripes say that ultimately consumers pay the price of tariffs.
I don't believe that.
Can you guarantee American families won't pay more?
I can't guarantee anything.
Sir, your previous tariffs during your first administration cost Americans some $80 billion, and now you have major companies from Walmart, Black & Decker, AutoZone saying that any tariffs are going to force them to drive up prices for their consumers. How do you make sure that these CEOs, that these companies don't, in fact, pass on the cost of tariffs to their consumers?
They cost Americans nothing. They made a great economy for us. They also solve another problem. If we're going to have problems having to do with wars and having to do with other things, tariffs. I've stopped wars with tariffs by saying, you guys want to fight. It's great. But both of you are going to pay tariffs to the United States at 100%. And they have many purposes, tariffs, if properly used. I don't say you use them like a madman. I say properly used, but it didn't cost this country anything. It made this country money. I'll go a step further. Tariffs are going to make our country rich. Tariffs are going to help us pay off $35 trillion in debt. Tariffs are going to make our country safe, because China, as an example, doesn't want to play games with us if we're going to do tariffs on them. They don't want to play games. And if we have a lot of games being played on us right now. So you're right, Harry. You've always said the one thing he really believes in is tariffs. So apparently tariffs are magic. They can stop wars. They make us rich. And if anybody pisses us off, we put a tariff on them and we show them.
And he can do it without Congress. But he's always believed in tariffs. He's always been afraid of trade balances, even though trade balances can be really helpful. But that's basic economics. I mean, really basic. He's so ignorant. Oh.
And by the way, we didn't have time to put in all the clips, but one of them that I had wanted to put in that we took out for time's sake was about Taiwan. And I just want to point out that our policy has always been that we would defend Taiwan if it was attacked, and that's what's kept Taiwan from being attacked. So Welker specifically asked him, would you defend Taiwan? And his answer was, well, I'd negotiate. I'd negotiate. If they're going to do that, I'll put some big tariffs on them. Now, if you're China, what did you just hear when he said that? Well, if you invade Taiwan, I'll negotiate with you. I'm going to put a tariff on you. What they're hearing is, go ahead. But now let's get to the part that we really care the most about, which is prosecuting Americans.
And I get to be Trump this time.
Oh, that's right. Okay, there you go. You get to be Trump and I'll be Welker. Okay, here we go. Okay, let's talk about some of your picks to fill your administration. You named Kash Patel to be the next FBI director.
Yeah.
He has a list in his book of 60 people that he calls members of the so-called deep state. It includes Democrats like Joe Biden and Hillary Clinton. It includes former members of your cabinet, from Bill Barr to Christopher Wray. You campaigned on destroying the deep state. Do you want Kash Patel to launch investigations into people on that list?
No, I mean, he's going to do what he thinks is right, and I will.
Well, do you think it's right?
And I will.
But do you think it's right, sir?
If they think somebody was dishonest or crooked or a corrupt politician, I think he probably has an obligation to do it. But
is it your expectation, though, that Kash Patel will pursue investigations against your political enemies?
No, I don't think so.
Do you want to see that happen?
If they were crooked, if they did something wrong, if they've broken the law, probably. They went after me. You know, they went after me and I did nothing wrong.
I want to pause here because what you're saying is significant, because you wrote on Truth Social in 2023 that you're going to appoint a real special prosecutor to go after Joe Biden. Now you're saying you're not going to do that?
I'll say this. No, I'm not doing that unless I find something that I think is reasonable, but that's not going to be my decision. That's going to be Pam Bondi's decision, and to a different extent, Kash Patel, assuming they're both there. And I think they're both going to get approved. But you know, while you ask me that, what they've done to me with weaponization is a disgrace.
Pam Bondi talks about investigating the investigators. Do you want her to investigate Jack Smith?
I want her to do what she wants to do.
Do you want to see Jack Smith investigated?
Well, I think he's very corrupt, but I want her to do whatever she...
Are you going to direct her?
No, I'm not. That's what we call the dictator dance.
Yeah.
I'm not going to do it, but someone I appointed might do it, but that's up to them. It's not really up to me. I didn't really do this. This is what someone else thought. You know, it's not really me. This is what Viktor Orban did when he was interviewed about journalists by on the PBS NewsHour. He really got Amna Nawaz pissed him off. Orban got visually furious because she said, "What about prosecuting journalists?" And Orban said, "It's the prosecutors who did that. I have nothing to do with it." Right.
This is like, how dumb do they think we are? You know, they just keep insulting our intelligence over and over again. It's like, well, I'm not going to direct him to do it, but he can do whatever he wants because he knows that he wants him to do it. You don't need to explicitly say, I want you to prosecute Hillary Clinton. You can just say, well, whatever you think is best.
Yeah, I mean, it's not my decision. It's my staff's decision if they want to.
But it's totally disingenuous. It's like, who will rid me of the meddlesome priest? Remember that? Where the King Henry is like, who will rid me of this meddlesome priest? Meaning, for God's sake, someone shoot him. Someone kill him, please.
Right? No. We all know what he's doing. We all know what he's doing. And also, this gives him plausible deniability. He could also, if it goes south, he can say, I didn't order this.
Well, it gives him implausible deniability, but
you know what I mean. I agree with you. But I'm just saying that it gives him wiggle room so that if he wants, if it goes badly, he can say, I'm going to ask Pam Bondi to stop investigating X, Y, and Z because I don't think it's good for the country. So he has that, but he won't.
It's soprano speak. It's like, do you remember this? There's a gangster talk. It's like there's a scene where Christopher and a friend of his rob some people they're not supposed to rob, and there's an issue of what to do with them now, right? And they ask the Sopranos, Tony's mother, what do you think? She goes, well, Christopher loves, Tony loves Christopher kind of like a nephew. The other one, and then the next thing they're shooting the other one in the head. The other one.
There was another wonderful line from the pilot, actually, where Christopher loses it because he's so impulsive and a sociopath, and he kills someone that they were working with. Mm-hmm. And then the older guy says, we'll get rid of the body. And Christopher says, why? He goes, well, if there's no body, then maybe he was killed and maybe he wasn't. That uncertainty helps. Mm-hmm. That nothing can be pinned on you. So, John, before we talk to our guest, I've been thinking a lot this week about how to think about this interim period, because I keep saying we're watching Trump do threatening things. We're seeing him putting things into place. We're watching the Senate be cowed by him. We're seeing it. It's all dangerous. But we do have an interim of about 6 weeks before he takes office and pardons the January 6th political hostages, for example. And so I've been thinking about what should we do? And I'm going to ask you some questions. And I'll give you my answers too. The first is a word I've used before, which is demoralization. And demoralization really means that circumstances are so dire that you begin to believe that your moral values don't matter, that they won't have any impact, that being honest doesn't matter, that being a faithful citizen doesn't matter. And how are you experiencing that?
Actually, that's a really good definition, because I think that's part of what makes this period feel so dark. Is that it really feels like everything that we would associate with morality doesn't matter. Truth doesn't matter. Raping women doesn't matter. Racism doesn't matter. Treason doesn't matter. I mean, I could go on and on. But it actually, one of the things the most painful about it is the doesn't matter part, right? It'd be one thing if we were arguing about who was good and who was bad, who did he do it, didn't he do it, what did he know, when did he know it? But this is much more radical. It's like all of a sudden, that doesn't matter anymore. That doesn't count anymore. Having 34 felony convictions and being indicted for 99 different counts, not really a liability. The very fact that morals don't matter, to me, is more disturbing than anything else in a way, right? Then, okay, we lost and bad things are going to happen. But if we're in a moral free fall, that is terrifying.
Well, I agree with you, and I feel that too, that sense of being demoralized. On the other hand, 47% of the country voted for Kamala Harris. This was not a landslide. And also, I'm fighting to hold on to my moral values. I'm thinking about them. I'm talking to my students about them. I'm remembering and reminding myself of them, because they're the most important thing. It's funny because John and I grew up in the 60s when in 1968, with the amazing youth movement, the hippie movement, there was a real challenge to conventional morality, sexual morality, all those things. But as I've gotten older, a personal morality has become more important to me. Not conventional morality, but personal morality. That is a dedication to speaking the truth, to being honest with people I love, the morality of acting with good intentions. So I'm struggling to remember and remind myself of those, and to speak with other people about it and reminding them of their moral values. And I think, John, when you and I talk during the week, that's kind of what we've been doing, both being alarmed by what's happening, but also affirming our sense that this is not right. So I have two more questions for you. The second one is because you're demoralized, you then by definition feel powerless. Because personal values, when you feel effective in the world with your personal values, you have a sense of power. Not grandiose power, not crazy power, but you have a sense of, I act in a certain way and I get this response from the world. And when you work hard for a campaign and you think about Kamala Harris and you're so aware of how crazy Trump is, and no one in the country seems to understand mental health issues. Oh, by the way, the guy who was it Mangione who shot the CEO? Can I just say that, John, you'll agree with me. You know what a clinician hears when there's like a 21-year-old who suddenly disappears for 5 months and is writing manifestos and then shoots somebody? He's having a bipolar break. Sure. Any clinician would tell you that. And has it been in the newspapers? Not a word. Not a word. Because this country is fascinated by mental illness and understands nothing. All right, I'll shut up. Last thing. So this powerlessness. So, John, what do you do about the powerlessness that you're feeling?
Harry, I feel a little bit embarrassed that you're asking this question in the first person because, like many psychologists, I'm so much better at giving advice than actually living in an authentic and healthy way.
Me too.
So what I've been doing, I've been doing a lot of crying. I'm sad. I'm just terribly, terribly sad and scared. I don't have an answer.
When people suffer dementia or their friends suffer dementia or loved ones, there's a grief over the loss of their power.
Yeah.
And so I don't think your response is at all a troubling thing. It's an honest thing. And all right. And
you can ask me a third question about how I'm not coping. Go ahead.
Well, I just wanted to say the way that I'm trying to cope with feeling powerlessness. I haven't been crying. I've been living in denial during parts of the day. Parts of the day, I don't think about it. I don't watch Inside Politics anymore on CNN at 12 noon. I'm not watching Jake Tapper. I wish Jake Tapper would go somewhere.
I'm not listening.
Exactly. I'm in denial much of the time, but once a day, I read the Times. I look at one news show. It makes me sick, but I watch it, and then I go back into denial. So that's my strategy. I'm not saying it's good for everyone else, but it's working for me. Last thing is really what we talked about last time, and what the great Hungarian psychologist, whose name I can't pronounce, calls flow. That is, to get into mental states, whether it's gardening or it's writing a paper or it's whatever it is, it's writing a song
or meditation. We had
meditation
here on last week,
and that's a way of reconnecting with your morality, reconnecting with your power, and reconnecting with yourself in the face of this danger that we're watching unfold, and which we don't have a lot of power to stop, but we're watching it so that if there is a moment where we can oppose it, we will. Are you doing that too?
Which, the denial part, or
I don't think you're in denial if you're crying every day.
Yeah, my denial mechanisms are very, very weak.
No, I think you're expressing your grief, John. I don't think there's any denial going on. But are you doing that kind of meditating or that kind of getting into the flow of your thinking?
Yes. And to be honest, and actually, my wife, sees me, crumpled in a heap, and she goes, "Meditate. Go meditate more." Why aren't you meditating?
And that's just how she'd say it too. She's a sweetheart. All right. That's my check-in. I'm going to try to talk about different things like this each week because I think we all need it, and made me feel better. I don't know. There's still a lot to worry about, of course.
Well, I'm very excited about the guest that we have today. He's certainly here at the right time. Jason Stanley is a professor of philosophy at Yale, and he's just come out with a new book that's getting a lot of attention called Erasing History. Here's the book, How Fascists Rewrite the Past to Control the Future. Jason Stanley has been working on this issue of fascism for a long time. He's written 8 books, and including seven books, how propaganda works and how fascism works. So he is certainly the right person for us to be talking to today. Dr. Stanley, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me on.
So I read somewhere that you wrote an article the day after the election in which you said the end of democracy was not a surprise. Now, that's a very controversial statement at 2 levels. A lot of people are asking, how dire are things? Has democracy been ended, or is there still a chance for resistance? And if so, what would that even look like?
Well, of course, there's a chance for resistance. Look at what just happened in Korea. The president tried to declare martial law. The people wouldn't stand for it. Look at what happened in Bangladesh. The students went on the street and took down the Sheikh Hasina, the authoritarian president. And now Bangladesh, they killed hundreds of students, but they still deposed the government. So of course there's resistance, and we live in a country that is legendary everywhere in the world for its resistance to fascism. And that is, and what I mean is the civil rights movement. The Jim Crow South was a one-party fascist, racial fascism, as it's traditionally theorized in the Black intellectual tradition, and a non-violent protest, a non-violent movement that had years and years of organizing and planning overthrew it. So now, of course, the South remains non-democratic. It remains, North Carolina dominated by Republicans, even though there are more registered Democrats than Republicans. We know all of this. We know the ways in which the South has remained a one-party state, largely, and white dominated. But no, there's always there's always routes out. Democracy is a practice. Democracy is not a on-off thing. It's a practice of trying to be guided by the 2 great democratic values, freedom and equality. And you're living in a democracy when there's this constant struggle to realize those values. And you're not living in a democracy where people are like, we love the king, and everything we do should be for the glory of the king. That's not a democracy.
And that's kind of what they're trying to get us to be at, right? I mean, that's kind of part of what you're talking about when you talk about rewriting history, when you talk about the use of language and propaganda. Maybe you could explain something about how these things shape people's minds in ways that then can shape politics.
Yeah, I mean, erasing history is about the education system, and the education system is there to prepare citizens either for democracy or for authoritarianism. Right. In a monarchy, you would learn about the greatness of the monarch. You would learn about the greatness of the nation under the monarch. In a democratic system, you would have democratic schools and democratic universities that prepared you, the citizen, to be a policymaker, to be someone who's engaged in the business of the government. That's why in a democracy, you learn about other countries. You'd learn about the history of the Middle East, so you could make informed decisions about who's making the right choices about Israel, Palestine, and other countries. Once they start shutting down that kind of education, once they start telling people, okay, you can't learn about the history of the Middle East, you can't learn about the history of your country, you can't learn about the perspectives of LGBTQ citizens, then you're no longer living in a democracy. Just consult in your head. Look up, everyone, and consult in their head their model of a fascist or authoritarian state. Fascism being one variety of authoritarianism. It would be, they'd ask you to pledge allegiance to the nation all the time. They'd say you're first, you must love the nation and the leader represents the nation. And all this talk of democracy and all this talk of freedom and equality would not be there. It wouldn't be, okay, you wouldn't be asked to play a role in making decisions about what the nation could do. You'd be asked for blind obedience. And one thing we're seeing from the Trump regime is we're seeing a demand for patriotic education. You can't make decisions about the direction of your country unless you know, in a democracy, unless you know its past. In a democracy, you're constantly trying to make things more equal. You're constantly trying to make things more free. If you don't know who has been denied equality and why, you can't engage in that democratic project.
And what about the loss of teaching civics? I know that's a very commonplace complaint, but man, was I taught about the workings of government when I came up.
How to make a bill, the whole thing about, the Mr. Bill, and how he progresses through Capitol Hill, right?
Well, that's necessary, but not sufficient. You need to know a democracy is a system that was once thought for a long time thought to be impossible for thousands of years, in which we remain in a society, but we are in a society, but remain free. And how that's going to work, remaining in a society, but being in a society, but remaining free, is tricky. The philosopher Hobbes thought that we needed to remain in a society. To be in a society, we needed a monarch, a king, who would protect us from each other. So we need in a society, we need these laws to protect us from each other so that nobody comes in and beats us up or steals our stuff. So how do we remain free, even though we're in a society and we need these laws? Well, Rousseau's great idea, Jean-Jacques Rousseau, the sort of father of modern democracy, the main democratic political theorist, political philosopher, said everyone has to play a role in the formation of the laws that govern them. And what that means is everyone has to be informed. You can't be involved in making a decision about what your military should do with China unless you know something about China. So that process of being involved requires being informed. And that's the principal thing. Everybody needs to be informed. That's why it's so tough to teach the history of Israel and Palestine, because people do not want you to be informed. They want you to accept whatever, but knowledge, being informed, that's required for a democracy. So whenever you're attacking democracy, you're attacking people's knowledge. So they just have to, so they just sort of blind. They're just like, okay, the nation's greatness, this person represents it.
You wrote a book on propaganda, which I think is very relevant, because what you're saying is, in order for the citizenry to be informed and to participate, they need to have knowledge. But the problem is, what makes me so discouraged is that I feel there's such a powerful disinformation system now that it seems to almost reign supreme. That we joke about, well, if you want to hear the real story, you have to come to Shrinking Trump, which is, let's face it, pathetic, right? And so if you're watching obviously if you're watching Fox or you're in the right-wing news bubble, you're constantly being fed lies and repetitively. And the repetition is very important. If you hear something enough times, you begin to believe it's true. My mother was in market research. My first job in college was I had to code these forms where people drank some orange juice, the Tropicana, and they were asked to describe how it tasted. And the majority of people said it tastes like fresh squeezed. Now, Tropicana does not taste anything like fresh squeezed. It just doesn't. Okay, it's like the ash experiment. Who are you going to believe, your tongue or what you're hearing on the television? But that was their tagline. In the old days, when we watched TV, we couldn't zap through the commercials. We heard them over and over again, and that was their tagline: tastes more like fresh squeezed. And so after a while, people say it tastes more like fresh squeezed.
Yeah. So in many languages, the word for advertising and the word for propaganda are the same word. So it's only a few languages that make a difference between those. Propaganda is advertising for political goals. So you're absolutely, Bernays is considered the father of both. So public relations. So there are various. So we know one of the literatures I look at for my theoretical work is the advertising literature. So there are techniques that we know. It's the measuring the effectiveness of those techniques is always tricky. It's measuring how propaganda, the effectiveness of a propaganda campaign is tricky. You can tell by the results. For instance, there's a book by a Princeton sociologist about how Black Americans became the people who smoked menthols. That was an effective propaganda. In the 50s, that wasn't the case, and there was this enormous propaganda campaign. So propaganda campaigns can succeed. We know, for instance, that great replacement theory, which is the dominant theme of the Trump, the dominant sort of propaganda theme or advertising mechanism of the Trump of Trump's politics. We know that is a very effective technique. My colleague Jennifer Richardson has a 2014 paper on this, and she in this 2014 paper she shows that if you prime people with great replacement theory, that white replacement theory, if you just say to them before you ask them a series of questions, political questions, in 2042 the US will be majority minority, then they become much more right wing. Even on questions about climate change, they start being less skeptical about the more skeptical about man-made climate change. So human-caused climate change. So there are these techniques. We know great replacement theory is very effective and it gets wielded everywhere. It makes people much more right-wing for some reason, but much more wanting to preserve things. So, but it makes people want to. Also, another thing is makes people form more defense spending when they're told that in 2042 America will become a majority minority. So there are these techniques, but really a lot of my books, my latest book, Erasing History, is also about propaganda, because the schools they're supposed to give you critical history in a democracy. School, the Trump administration, the Trumpists are like, Trump himself always says the schools are anti-American, just like Modi in India says the schools are anti-Indian. Russia, Putin says the schools are anti-Russian. That's just, paint by numbers authoritarianism. And so China, there's they make sure the schools are, praise the nation. So the schools are, if you grow up with the mythic past, the idea that your country was great, that your country was innocent and great, and these globalists and liberals are trying to ruin it, then if you grow up with that mythic past, then you're going to be susceptible to the propaganda message that people are trying to destroy its greatness. Whereas if you grow up more critical understanding of your nation's past, you won't be susceptible to that kind of propaganda.
It's like the Hitler Youth. He's trying to create a Hitler Youth.
Yeah, Paulo Freire, the Brazilian educational philosopher, the philosopher of education, said the educated the educated person cannot be politically deceived.
Well put. I was looking at your article too, which is, you talk about one of the conditions for the loss of democracy is gross inequality, which we've been seeing. I remember even 20 years ago, they were talking about how long can CEOs be making hundreds of millions of dollars when their workers are not. And in fact, my understanding, just looking at this moment in the culture, right, which is, first of all, you have a catastrophic working class that cannot afford to have a family in a house with two people working. They can barely do it, and they're demoralized and they're furious. Also, there's been a real degradation of the social norms and mental health norms, so that schools are not just schools. They're giving free lunch and free breakfast. They're doing assessments. They're doing mental health assessments. I had students doing psychotherapy under my supervision in the rural schools outside of Ithaca. And the schools were beside themselves. I mean, they could barely get their kids to learn because they were suffering so much. And if you put that together with the breakdown of a kind of central media, where now you can go get your news in the way that you like it, it seems to me this is all coming together to create a terrible moment for us, an opportunity for Trump.
Yeah, so this just again gets back to Jean-Jacques Rousseau, the modern philosopher who sort of came up with the grand theory of how democracy could work. And Rousseau's idea was that democracy cannot work with gross inequalities, because then people filled with resentment for each other. And then a demagogue could come and exploit those resentments and aim them at scapegoats. So that's Rousseau's idea. And Rousseau's solution is to have equality so people won't have so many resentments. The idea is that, if there's massive inequality, people are really just filled with anger and resentment. And you could direct, a clever propagandist could direct that resentment away from its true causes. Right. As we see in the Trump administration, the billionaires
exactly
take control of the government and privatize everything and make life much more miserable for everyone.
Yeah. You're talking about the education. Are you familiar with this? You probably are. There's this company, Prager, I think they're called, that make these propagandist cartoons that are being shown in Florida, for example, where they're trying to, rewrite the whole issue of slavery. And they have these little cartoons like, in slavery, Black people learned useful skills. So it's as if slavery was kind of a job training program. And this is a real a cartoon that they're showing in Florida schools.
Yeah, I discuss it in my book.
I figured you probably did.
I talk about Prager. Prager University is Prager University. I talk about multiple videos from PragerU. 6 states allow them as educational resources in the classroom. So I won't go into detail about the different Prager University videos, but yeah, they're straight propaganda videos, like the Origins of Slavery one, narrated by Candace Owens. She says, white men were the first people ever to eliminate slavery. And she repeats the
I guess that's one way of looking at it.
Right.
Completely omitting, completely. I mean, W.B. Du Bois's book, Black Reconstruction, is all about how Black Americans were deeply involved. You couldn't have won the Civil War without Black Americans, without Black soldiers fighting for the Union, and without general strike without enslaved Black Americans in the South, doing work stoppages and work slowdowns. There was. Candace Owens represents it entirely as pre-Du Boisian history. Black Americans didn't lift a finger to save themselves, and of course, Haiti, the only country that had a successful slave rebellion. Well, it wasn't whites who did it. So PragerU are particularly, their videos are all about feeding the myth of this great mythic white innocent past. It wasn't so bad. It was great. There's one about Christopher Columbus, who we know was like a massive, and the horrors of the Spanish colonial conquest of the Americas. Completely, there's this discussion between these two cartoon characters where they're like, well, don't judge. One of them's talking to a cartoon Christopher Columbus, and Christopher Columbus says, "I shouldn't be judged by the standards of today," and actually. Bartholomew de Casas wrote a book in the 16th century about the horrors of Spanish colonialism and what was happening, and talking about, people being roasted alive and pregnant women having their babies torn from their bellies. And, so it was very well known what was happening. I mean, it was easily recognized. It wasn't well known. It was easily recognizable to any empathetic human being. So this is all massively misrepresented, and it's the kind of Jim Crow history that was told, and it completely. And then that's a method of representing schools and universities as anti-American, because the idea is, the truth is that indigenous people are lucky we came. The few that are left. And the truth is that, enslaved Black people were happy. And so all of this history that says they weren't is there for this nefarious anti-American purpose. And the same thing's going on in Russia. The same thing goes on in China. This is just authoritarianism. China's a bit different, right, with the Cultural Revolution, for instance. The idea is all the bad things that, there's a Victoria Amelina was a Ukrainian journalist who was killed by the Russians in 2023, I believe. And she has a piece called "Nothing Bad Has Ever Happened" about growing up in the Soviet Union.
I wanted to ask you one more thing, if I can. The title of your book reminds me of George Orwell and how eloquent he was about the way that the Soviet Union was erasing history and changing the narrative. And he was so concerned that there wouldn't be a record left, that they could be successful. Is Orwell someone you like to think about, or in this context?
Absolutely. I mean, I think Orwell makes some mistakes. For instance, Winston has to be tortured to accept obvious falsehoods. We know you don't have to be tortured.
I agree with you. Absolutely.
Unless you call watching Fox News torture,
Right,
which it
exactly.
is. But
So, but Orwell is obviously a 20th century figure. When I ask people, when you're told we need patriotic education, just think about 1984. Like that was patriotic education. Like we've always been at war with Oceania. Like, it's all about love for the nation and adulation for the leader. When people are like, you have to love the nation, rather than the values of the nation.
Maybe they'll be telling us we've always been allies with Russia.
Right, exactly. So, right. So when people tell you those things, then, Orwell helps us see that's authoritarianism. That's what I mean when I say I'm thinking of Orwell. When I say look at your cartoon view of authoritarianism in your head, it's people telling you love the nation, and anyone who criticizes the nation is a traitor and must go to prison.
Milan Kundera had that wonderful story where, right, there's a picture of a figure in a Soviet parade who gets erased until there's nothing left but his hat.
Yeah,
which I thought was just brilliant. It's terrifying that we could see this again. It really is.
But we've seen it before. We've seen it before here. The Jim Crow South was an authoritarian racial hierarchy. Now we have a much more traditional, mid-century European system, or Latin American dictatorship, if you will, a kind of personalist regime surrounding one person and that one person's goals and desires, which is, frankly, most of the world lives under that one-man rule. I remember I was recently speaking to a friend of mine from the Congo, and he was like, "Oh, I see the United States is going to go one-man rule." So that's our situation. But it's kind of how most countries are. We were never and ironically, that more than anything shows that we aren't exceptional.
Oh, that's wonderful. Do you have any advice for our listeners about coping in this interim between presidents and afterwards?
I think I mean, we're all in it together, so we're all trying to figure out how to do that. I think not obeying in advance. Everybody's repeating Timothy Snyder's advice. That's the key thing. We're seeing a lot of that. We're seeing the newspapers normalize that. Oh yeah, they're going to go after the media, and that's just what's going to happen. And so, not normalizing what's happening, keeping your outrage at violations of democratic norms. That's going to be essential.
This is so important what you're saying, and we're really experiencing it. Before you came on, we were talking about the fact that our scheduled guest for next week, who was extremely enthusiastic about being out on the show, very abruptly sent me a curt text saying he changed his mind. He felt it wasn't appropriate for him and refused to speak to me on the phone, even though we've been close personal friends and colleagues for many, many years. This is, I think, the kind of thing we're seeing, because democracy can't defend itself and education can't defend itself. And so part of what they're doing, which every authoritarian movement does, is trying to get rid of the experts, right? Trying to flush them out of every institution so that the cronies can take over. So we see people now already fleeing the federal government because they know they're going to be persecuted, so their resumes are flying. And I think we're seeing something similar in education, where these teachers feel threatened, especially in states like Florida, and so they're leaving. But the problem is, and that's a totally normal thing for them to do, but the problem is, everyone fleeing, right, they're leaving a vacuum. And that's what they're trying to accomplish.
I'm the child of Holocaust survivors. You got to, at some point, you measure the system. You measure who's, my grandmother didn't flee Berlin with my father until 1939, August 1939, late July 1939. Had she fled 4 years earlier, 5 years earlier, she wouldn't have spent her life, in financially difficult circumstances. She would have entered the United States at a much higher social level. Once you leave, when too many other people are trying to leave, it's harder. Sure. I'm not going to. I was raised in a family. I believe things can happen and countries can be. I mean, I was once giving a talk in Europe, and someone came, raised their hand, was like, "I'm Russian and I want to know how I can stop fascism in Russia. I'm getting my master's here and then I'm going to go back and become a teacher. How can I stop fascism?" I'm like, stay the hell away from Russia. I mean, it would be nuts to go. Now, we want to stop things before they get anywhere near that. However, if people are leaving, they're telling people, they're delivering a message that this is extreme, and that message needs to be heard. And I think we are all recognizing that. My parents told me, when you see people in different areas, so it's not just one area, but you see the doctors, the professors, the journalists, leaving. Well, that's time to worry. Now, it's always a bet when you leave. It's always a bet on the future. And lots of people leave, and then they find out they didn't have to leave. But so that's the kind of bet they're making. But I don't blame anyone if you have trans kids, go.
Yeah, right, exactly. Get out of Florida.
It's actually you're not being responsible if you stay in southern states with trans kids, if you have trans kids. And plenty of people cannot leave. But
yes,
if you just keep in mind the situation in Iran, are you really going to tell an Iranian you have to stay in Iran? No, it's a brutal authoritarian country. Now, we're nowhere near that, but I am looking around me and I'm seeing that a lot of people are thinking of leaving, and I understand what that means. That's how you
right. So I just want to speak among ourselves here. We're three Jews here, okay? Yeah. And one of the things I say about the Jews are the best fleers. Nobody can beat us at fleeing because we have so much experience,
so much practice.
And my former father-in-law, he's recently passed away. He was one of the last people to escape Austria. He's actually got reparations during his life. He was so upset when my wife and I said, we might have to flee to Austria.
Right. Yeah. Well, Austria
Jews fleeing America for Austria.
Well, Austria just got taken over by a far-right government. This is the picture of my grandmother and father on the boat from Berlin, August 1st, on the boat from Hamburg, Germany. And my father, he had been in hiding since Kristallnacht. So I always keep that on my wall as a reminder. But we are nowhere near that situation. But we are near the situation when Hannah Arendt fled Germany in 1934. Joachim Prince, 1933. I believe. You want to leave before 1937 or 19.
It's like market timing. It's like market timing, right? You don't want to leave too early, but you don't want to leave too late.
Well, that's the situation. That's always, it's we're not at a place where it's in any way too late, or it's in any way. Once they start targeting the media, they've already said they're going to target the media. So if Pete Hegseth gets the government to target, progressive Jews like the three of us, then, it's, it might not be time to leave for one group, but it might be time to leave for another group. And people've got to make their own choices about what, there's stand and fight, but there's also, you have families and everybody has a responsibility to themselves.
Well, this is just an amazing conversation. It's a conversation I don't think any of us ever thought we were going to have, although maybe, Jason, you were ahead of us. So maybe you saw it before we did, but it can happen here. And I'm really grateful for you for coming on the show tonight.
Thank you so much.
What a pleasure. Thanks again for coming.
Thank you. Great to be in discussion, even in these times.
Yes, thank you.
Yeah.
Well, that interview was really fantastic. I am so glad that we had Dr. Stanley here. I felt like we really were three brethren here together facing the reality of the situation. And his expertise was extremely valuable, I think, in putting this in historical perspective.
Well, I loved his walking with his laptop for us to see the photograph. I found that so moving. Folks, if you're listening to this on Spotify, I really suggest you go to YouTube and just watch the end of the interview so you can see the photograph on the wall of his grandfather as a little boy and his it was his father as a little boy and his grandmother.
Right. Who really escaped Germany, who escaped the Holocaust.
Who escaped the Holocaust. So are you going to ask me what we learned today?
So I guess we reached the shrink wrap section of the show. What did we learn today?
Oh, I don't know. I think we're learning to take a breath. I think we're trying to learn to know what we're capable of, what our power is, what our power isn't. I'm hoping we're learning to reflect on the psychological impact of this election has on those of us who were concerned about it, who have been informed, as our guest suggests, that a real citizen of a republic needs to be. And I hope we learn that we still have to turn to ourselves and to the things that bring us joy, to the people we love, the things we love to do, as we prepare for a very difficult time.
And I think part of what we're having to absorb is that many people will be stepping backwards, right?
Yes.
And in some cases, it'll feel, my my ex-wife's family lived in France during World War II. Her father was in the resistance, and she talks often about how neighbors would denounce neighbors. And this happens in these authoritarian states. Now, the fact that my father-in-law lived was actually, he lived because they came to his apartment building in Vienna and they said, "Are there any Jews living here?" And the Gentiles said no. They lied. And when they were told, "Hey, you guys better get out of here. The Nazis are asking if there's any Jews here," that's when they left. Okay.
And you see, they weren't demoralized.
That's right. The people were not demoralized because they did a moral thing. And this is what I'm talking about. Protecting people. So unlike my cowardly friend who didn't come for the interview, he took a big step backwards, which, by the way, Harry, reminds me, I've got a new knock-knock joke. Are you ready for this? Knock, knock.
Sure. Who's there?
Harry.
Harry who?
Exactly. I hardly knew you. You were like the coffee boy. When they come and ask me, I'll deny everything.
Wait, isn't that what Trump would always say? I don't know who Paul Manafort is. He worked for me for a week or two. I don't know.
I mean, I hardly knew that guy, Harry Schmary. I don't know. He was like the coffee boy.
So John, you also had an announcement about the future of our show and what we're hoping to do with it.
Yes. So a lot of people have been wondering, understandably, whether we're going to continue with the show. That's something that we wondered too, to be honest. It wasn't an automatic. And secondly, whether if we did with the focus change, since now we really are not at a period where the mission of shrinking Trump really makes sense anymore. But I have to say, Harry, doing this show with you has been one of the most enjoyable things in my life. And obviously our viewership has been going way down, as all news has been going way down, because people are withdrawing. People are practicing your method, which is to really avoid the toxic stimuli as much as they can. And so I do appreciate the fact that even though our viewership is going down, the comments, the warmth and the gratitude in the comments are going up. The people keep saying, so nice. And I'm really touched. I even moved to tears by some of them, where people saying, "I felt so desperate. Watching your show has made me feel so much better. Thank you." So many people thanked us for still being here. Really appreciate it. So I think what we've decided we're going to do is we are going to continue the show after the inauguration. Though we're going to change the title. It's going to be Shrinking with John and Harry, and we are going to be on a different channel. We're going to start our own YouTube channel. We haven't started it yet, so don't look for it. You can't subscribe to it. But we just wanted to give you some advance notice that that's what we're going to be doing. So at some point, we'll give you the web address, or you can, Google it, and we'll keep reminding you between now and inauguration, because obviously we want to take as many of you with us as we can. So we will keep reminding you that we are going to be moving on, but in a new form. And I think that not having Trump as the focus is going to detoxify a lot of our conversations. Basically, John and Harry are going to shrink whatever the heck they want to shrink. It's our show. We can talk about whatever we want. But
we will be
current events, and we're going to
be looking at current events, maybe cultural things too. But we're here to be on the lookout for what's happening politically. So the show won't change that much, but it does give us some latitude to talk about other things that might be of help to you. We were trying to think about music to end the show, and we have this problem on YouTube, which is we're only allowed 10 seconds of copyrighted material before YouTube just pulls the material. So we're always afraid. Last week, you might have noticed our Zen music. It came from a website which allows you to take uncopyrighted music. But today I wanted to leave us with a song. I was trying to find We'll Meet Again, but I couldn't find a non-copyrighted version. So you guys, with your patience, I actually recorded a version of a wonderful song you probably don't know from I think the 40s, called "I'll Close My Eyes," and I thought that it was in keeping with the theme of denial that I'm talking about.
I've noticed that.
I thought we would end with that. So
By the way, when was the last time you got that advice from a psychologist? Just close your eyes and just deny the whole thing. Just never. Okay, just.
So to the great man in the control booth, hit it, Rex.
I see no evil, hear no evil. La 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 la. I can't hear it. La 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 la. I can't see you. La la la.
Hug your cat, everybody.
Hug your cat.
Be nice to your crying husband.
Or your chicken.
Oh, what a song, right?
Oh, what a great piano player.
No. Scratchy. Thanks, folks. Have a great week. We'll see you next time. Do tell your friends about us. Tell them we're trying to spread hope.